So since we bought in the fall, we wanted to really get ready for the next spring. So we plowed everything down really deep to get the sod down under. We disked a couple of times. Actually, a neighbor disked because I didn't know how to drive a tractor. I still don't. And we removed the rocks, the pebbles, everything. We had a backhoe come in on the farm and install drainage tiles, fill in the dips on the slopes when there was dips, because you really don't want that on your farm. We had a pond dug. We did all of that heavy earth moving work early on because we knew that we wanted to get that going, which is a setup of permanent raised beds. That is the backbone and the foundation of our cropping system on the farm, is this idea of permanent raised beds. That also explained why we didn't want to have a tractor. There was two factors there. The first one is that, tractors at the end of the hedgerow, they take up a lot of space. And so we didn't have any space to spare. So we thought, okay. And then the next thing is that tractors, they were invented for plowing. And so for plowing, for disking, for shaping beds, they're great. But if you're working in a permanent bed system, you don't do all of that. We've raised our beds the first spring, and we've been farming on these beds on that 2-inch ever since. So we didn't need a tractor. So that was the starting point. There's a concept in the fact that it's permanent that makes it so that you need to think about this a bit more than just like, okay, we're doing this, because this is permanent. And so we were carefully thinking about width of beds, and what we decided upon was beds that are 30-inch with pathways that are 18. And the reason why we went with 18 and not 12 or 16 is because if you look closely, it gets pretty tight here. And I have a pretty tight butt, okay? And so if this is too short, then this doesn't work out with all the crops that you can put in the beds. And it's more accessible with wheelbarrows. And by the way, this guy, he's harvesting in a crouching position. And this is how you need to be harvesting if you want to be harvesting and farming for 30 years or more, okay? We can talk more about that later on. 30-inch, why not 24? Why not 26? Why not 42? Well, because all of the tools that are out there, and were out there back then when we started with regards to market gardening, are standardized to 30-inch so that you can do the work in one pass. Okay? And then the question is, well, why are all these tools standardized to 30-inch? Well, the answer is because of that guy, Elliot Coleman. So Elliot Coleman, everybody knows him, but it's funny how not that many people really followed what he was up to. How many people do you know that have been farming 1.5 acres, like he is, for 20 years? Like, everybody decides to scale up after 5 or 6 years of struggling. And so that didn't happen to us. So Elliot Coleman wrote The New Organic Grower in 89, very influential book. I've probably read it 30 times when I was starting. I was trying to figure out what he was talking about, because I thought that was a great way to go about it. And so he went to Europe all over, he imported tools, developed all the catalog with Johnny's. And again, all of these tools, you can find them in 15-inch for 2 pass or 30-inch with 1 pass. We knew also from experience, because when we started, we were already working with 30-inch, that there was a lot of advantage with regards to posture built into them. It's really easy to hop over a 30-inch bed, which is not the case on a 42-inch bed. And if you're not stepping into the bed, which you don't want to do, well, you need to go around it, so you're losing time. It's also easier to harvest in the middle of the bed when you're in a crouching position. And if you're working with bed widths that are much larger than that, well, you're hyperextending your back to harvest the middle of the bed. And some people, they do yoga in the morning and the night, I try to have good posture during my day's work so that I don't need to be really, well, each his own. Yoga's great, but. So that's important. And this is a design concept that'll, determine how you work for a long, long amount of time. And always remember this. People kind of don't think about this, but harvesting on a market farm is half of the work of the farm. Like, you'll be harvesting half of your working hours throughout the year. So you need to be comfortable, okay? Especially if you want to do this for a long time. The other thing that we did on our farm that was different is that, so we didn't go with a tractor, but we bought a BCS walking tractor. And BCS is the company that makes them in Italy. And these machines are really rugged, versatile, really tailor-made to work on small acreage. But even better than that, I think God invented that tool to work on permanent raised beds. Like, they go hand in hand. When we bought ours, I knew nothing about them. I had never seen one before. We didn't have YouTubes or the internet back then. And it was a big leap of faith to just buy it. But I thought, this is what we need, and it's a choice that I've never regretted. Now, this tool, again, it's like the perfect power unit for the small farm. It was also an economic reality because we knew from going to Europe that we wanted to work with a power harrow, and we needed a flail mower if we were going to do green manure. And when we were looking at these tools that weren't as available back then for small tractors, man, the price was 5 or 6 times higher. So we could find all of that for walking tractors, fifth of the price. That was an easy choice. The other thing that we did that fall really fast was to set up hoop houses and one greenhouse. And we were fortunate, there was a nursery that was closing, so we bought these 2 16 by 100 feet hoop houses for like under, it was like $700. And we put up the greenhouse pretty fast. I would do this all by myself. They weren't really nicely built, I had to redo them all like 4 years later because they were all falling apart. But at least they were going in the spring, and that's really what I wanted. So we standardized the width, but also the length of our beds. Okay, so on the farm, all of the beds are 100 feet long. And that's a clever design because it makes it so that all the row covers, the insect nets, the irrigation line, drip irrigation, they're all standardized to 100 feet, so you need less of them. And also, if you've worked on farms where you're, rummaging around looking for the row cover that's the right length, you're losing a lot of time. And just as a sidebar, time is what you don't have on a small farm. You don't have time. You have money perhaps because you can get some, you can raise some, you can have a naked calendar program and put a Kickstarter thing and raise $40,000, whatever. You can make that happen for yourself, but time you don't. If you want to have quality of life and spend some time with your children at the end of the day, you need to be effective and efficient throughout your day. So that's a design that is pretty clever in that way. Okay, so that's just kind of a sidebar, but I'll be talking a lot about that later on. And because we did that, the bed became a unit of measure on the farm. So when we're talking about, tons per acreage, 80 tons per acre, what does that mean? Like, what it means is 4 wheelbarrows per bed. Because we've made that calculus once, and now we've been using these numbers ever since, and it's able to make charts. How many lettuce of heads? It's easy. We've calculated that. Broccoli heads, whatever. We've calculated the yields of all of our crops per bed, and then we've made charts that are really useful when we do the crop planning, which we'll get to later on today. Okay? So, permanent beds, 30-inch, standardized to the length. They don't need to be 100 feet. They can be 80, they can be 60, they can be 40, they can be whatever, as long as they're all the same size. Before we dug the first bed, we had a map that we drew of the farm, and that was an important feature, and that's an important thing that all of the people that are starting farming, they should spend a lot of time mapping out and designing their farm on paper. And I was fortunate because I was reading all these permaculture book, you know, these fat ones by Bill Mollison, fat number 1, fat number 2. And you would open them, and it was just like, you would see these layouts of farm systems, and he would talk about zones. Zone 1 is the zone that you put closer to your house because that's the zone you visit more oftenly. It's usually the garden, and zone 2 is the orchard, and zone 3 is the woodlot, and zone 4 is the sauna, or I don't know, whatever. But it got me thinking about the importance of minimizing foot traffic on the farm. I had already enough experience back then because of all the farms that I had worked on and that I had, you know, the prior setting that we had, which was like a disaster. You know, the garden was down the hill and the washing station was up the hill. And every time I would harvest, I would need to pull, you know, the harvesting cart, and it would, you know, it was crazy. I was losing a lot of time. So in this new site, what we did is that we made sure that all of our gardens are surrounding the warehouse where we wash and process the vegetables. So we're never really far from where we are. And that seemed that, like, you know, it might seem like something that's not super, you know, important, but it is, because if you're out there in the fields and you forget your field knife, or that intern, Jean-Luc, forgot to go to the bathroom, and that implies that he's walking like 15 minutes to come back, to go, and, you know, 15 minutes to walk up again. That's half an hour in an 8-hour workday. And that happens like 3 or 4 times every week. And we're farming for 40 weeks. Imagine the downtime that is lost just walking around, cruising. And again, you know, if you want to be productive and efficient, you don't want to be walking around and cruising. You want to be working. So that at 5, you can take your bike and go for a bike ride. So that design is, I think, really important. Try and minimize foot circulation on your farm. So we did that. There's a water line that goes all around of our gardens. And we also took all of the beds that we were planning on digging and grouped them together in field blocks. Because it's a lot easier to manage 10 field blocks of 16 beds than 160 beds. So your mind works better that way. So we did that. And it was at that time that we were also doing the crop rotation for the farm. And so we knew the importance of crop rotating, and we were trying to figure out how to go about it. And so, you know, you take the vegetables and you group them by botanical families or by fertilizing needs. You know, you put the heavy feeders together and the light feeders together, and then you try to have 4 years between different botanical families. There's all sorts of principles that you want to follow. And what we did is that we were looking at all these and playing with cards, trying to find the proper sequence for all of this to flow. And at the end of the exercise, what we found is that we needed to have 10 field blocks going on a 10-year program. And that was the reason why we ended up having 10 field blocks in the garden. Okay, so I could talk more about my rotation today, but it's all in the book. I think it's well described how we went about it. But the take-home message that we designed a pretty complex rotation. It's fairly complex and sophisticated, but organized it in a way that is really easy and simple to follow year in, year out. What is growing here, the light feeders, are going there next year. And the heavy feeders that are same botanical family or grouped, they get the compost every year and then they move. So we're putting compost every other year, but always on the heavy feeders, which is a great way to rationalize your compost. And we have 4 years interval between all the crops that we wanted to have that sequence. So we planned it on paper, and that's how the farm was designed afterwards. So we're not messing around thinking about, okay, what's happening? We know. It's rotating. There's some drawbacks to this way of doing things, and I'll get to that as we talk about crop planning later on. Okay? Any question so far? Yes.
When in your process did you figure out that cycle? Was that in the first year?
That was before the first year. And because we knew ahead of time that we didn't have more space. So we weren't expanding. So we were limited in space. we were, confined, and we thought, let's just integrate the rotation there. One advice that I give to people that are starting, when it's time to sit down and figure out how to rotate your crops, and you're in your first, second, or third year of market gardening or market farming, just forget about it. Just plant, whatever, anything, anywhere, whatever. Just don't lose time thinking about a complex cropping system, because there's like a 99% chance that after 4 years, you'll have scaled up, you've developed new markets, you've understood more of what you're doing, and then all the plan that you made 3 years ago is down the drain. And so if you're not following a crop planning regime for at least 5 or 6 or 10 years, there's no point in doing one, because you won't follow it anyway. So just wait a bit before you kind of know what you're doing, and then you can think about crop planning. Okay? First 3 years are the hardest. So whatever you can take out of the load, just do it. And then you'll have time to think about your systems, and you'll know more of how it needs to be done. So, dug the garden the first spring, and already the house, the rabbit coop, was much better. And yeah, it's been great. Great trip.